Welcome to Cracking Cooperstown, where we talk all things Baseball Hall of Fame and Hall of Fame collecting. Join us as we discuss Hall of Fame voting, autographs, cards, baseballs, resumes, and trajectories. Debate and discussion as we look to crack the code to Cooperstown. Now here's your hosts, Jake Brewer, Dom Manna.
What's up, Dom? We're finally back, man.
What's up, Jake?
We had an ascent to greatness on Hobby Palooza, and then we disappeared for a while.
We peaked truly. We truly peaked. We got a little too big for our britches over here at this little podcast venture that we're doing. But no, it's great to be back. There was definitely stuff in both of our lives that was getting in the way of kind of sitting down and setting up this recording. But I'm glad to finally be doing this. It's always fun just getting to talk to you in general. But when we're talking Hall of Fame and kind of debating and discussing these different players and trajectories, it's a lot of fun. And when we did our episode about the future of the Hall of Fame catcher, there was a really good response from our fan base that we hope comes back for this new edition. And they were kind of asking us like, oh, are you going to go around the diamond and do the best position players across the whole field that are not in the Hall of Fame and compare them to different guys who are in the Hall of Fame or on track to be in the Hall of Fame and kind of highlight those names and cases. And a topic that has been talked about a lot recently in the last couple of years with the way the real game of baseball has been going is the future of the Hall of Fame pitcher, because 300 wins looks to be a thing of the past. These pitchers aren't pitching the same innings that they used to be able to compile the strikeouts. And it's all about the different rate stats and the efficiency as opposed to those true workhorses, the Verlanders, the Scherzers, the Kershaws that are starting to finally wane out of the league. So got a bunch of guys that we're going to talk about in the same format. There's going to be some blind pairs to talk about. But Jake, just before we get into it, what is your thought about how the Hall of Fame was viewing pitchers and how they're going to have to start viewing them going forward?
So I know that Cracking Cooperstown superfan Sammy Thunder is really excited for this pitching episode. And we talked about the changing landscape of what makes a Hall of Fame catcher last time, and we're doing pitcher this time. And I think they're the two positions that change is coming about right now in this era, because so much has changed for both of those positions and what constitutes, a Hall of Fame player at both of them respectively. With a pitcher, you mentioned 300 wins. That's a magical number. 3,000 strikeouts has been a magical number. There's been a lot of talk, especially on the wins side. Will we ever see another 300-game winner? Verlander feels like the last possibility. His chances have shrunk. I know they're very small at this point, but he's the last hope at that realistically, unless there's another pendulum swing in the game as a whole. So that being, the old marker, will there be a new one? Because going into this, traditionally the last several years, my personal thresholds have been, 300 wins is automatic, 3,000 strikeouts is automatic. If you get to 200 wins, that's a secondary qualifier. And if you get to 2,500 Ks, that's a secondary qualifier. And should those be the staples? Should they be different? Like Hall of Fame catching, will the awards in the trophy case continue to carry more weight? For pitchers specifically, I know sabermetrics is not a new thing. It's not a new wave. That's kind of been here for a while. But will WAR start to be looked at even more for a pitcher where those, quantitative stats and the milestones that have been there forever become near non-existent or very, very rare, to the point where qualitative is really, really heavy on the pitching side? And I know we're going to get into that and what our thoughts are and how they might have shifted as we go through these blind resumes here.
Yeah, I think those are all really good points and things that are going to have to be thought about. And it's interesting because we're talking about how they're going to view them going forward, the ones that hit the ballot in the coming years or are currently on it. But it's also interesting to think if they're going to lower the bar for this era, how does that impact, they're starting to elect players with 200 wins. X player that retired 40 years ago has like 270 wins. Like how are you going to toggle what is impressive? Because maybe they didn't hit that 300 like gem milestone back in the day, but compared to the pitching totals that we're seeing today, they look a lot more impressive. So that's what's really interesting with the state of the Hall of Fame pitcher. And before we get into these blind comparisons, I have to say, if I do not select one of your favorite pitchers outside of the Hall of Fame, that does not mean that they cannot be looked at in a different light. There's actually a lot of people, even if you just look at just straight WAR for all-time pitchers in the top 100, there's a lot of guys that aren't in the Hall of Fame that are in the top 100 WAR for pitchers. So there's a lot of guys who had really good careers and could get Hall of Fame consideration down the line. But I just tried to cherry pick some cases that were similar enough where it could just be an interesting discussion and talk about it going from there.
And one thing of note there, Dom, that I found as an interesting statistic, because if you look at the Hall of Fame today, there's 346 Hall of Famers at the time of this recording, 273 are players, 84 are pitchers, okay? So that's 30.76%. We'll just call it 30%, right? That across history of all Hall of Famers, in terms of players, 70% are hitters and just 30% are pitchers. So there's definitely less of them that get in. A lot of people out there would say, well, that's because they don't play every day like a position player. There should be, therefore less pitchers. But as I am going to allude to another one of our episodes where we've done it twice now, we talk about who are the 40 players playing right now that are Hall of Fame players in the future, because on average, there's been research done on it. On average, in any given year, there are 40 players playing right now that are active. They'll be Hall of Famers someday. Well, if you use that 30% marker, that means of the 40, 12 on average should be pitchers, while 28 are hitters. And I know that's something that I'm going to talk about as we kind of go through those. So I wanted to throw that out there as kind of a baseline. When we're talking about, top 100 pitchers or whatever it may be, where there are proportionally less pitchers that are going to get in the Hall.
I think that's really interesting. And I do think that because I did not have 12 pitchers on my 40, I do think as the kind of bar gets lowered, that percentage of the active Hall of Famers might also get lowered a little bit as well, just because the players are struggling to get even what the new milestones are. But it'll be interesting to kind of see over time how these pitchers get treated on the ballot. We're not going to be talking about convicted steroid guys because that's something that's just a no to me. And we're not going to go and waste your guys' time. You've heard about Roger Clemens and Curt Schilling. They're the only two members of the 3,000 Strikeout Club that have gotten washed out by the writers, and it's not for baseball-related things. They both are very deserving guys in terms of their careers, and I expect them to get elected eventually on one of these era committees to right the wrongs of the baseball writers there. But we're talking more about the guys that would be in the borderline or below the line that was in this episode. So adding this to the stage here, I'm going to present.
Yeah, and one note there, because you mentioned Clemens and Schilling. I bet if you asked most baseball fans, especially when we're talking about there may never be another 300-game winner, and that seems so elusive. If you ask the average baseball fan, which club's more exclusive, 300 wins or 3,000 Ks? Which one has less members? I think most people would say 300 wins. But as it currently stands in 2024, 3,000 Strikeout Club is actually more exclusive at this point. I think that's going to change over time. I think 3,000 Ks is going to catch up with the way the game is played today, with the strikeout rates, even with the lower, pitch counts, the innings limits, guys not going as deep in games. I think there are several guys on track, and I know I'm going to get into it, that will get there. And I think the 3,000 K Club will see new members over the next decade or so, where 300 wins may not see a single one.
Yeah, and I think that has to do with a big pivot in the game as well. Both the pitchers were trying to complete the game and complete the game with their team winning. That used to be the mindset, like, I'm not coming out I want to help my team win, etc. And the batters were also trying to make contact and not trying to strike out, as opposed to now where there's a lot of hitters swinging for the fences and a lot of pitchers that are looking for movement and strikeouts. So you've seen that shift. The 3,000 strikeout club wasn't actually a club until Bob Gibson got there in 1971. Walter Johnson was the only pitcher before that to have 3,000 or more strikeouts. So that the emphasis on strikeouts and the amount of strikeouts that have been recorded has ramped up significantly in the last 50 years. So it's really interesting to keep that in mind as well, that guys like Clemens and Schilling are outside the Hall of Fame with 3,000 strikeouts, but we'll be talking about guys that didn't quite hit those cherry numbers. Now, this first pair that I got here, two guys that are separated by less than 10 WAR. The player on the right does have some more bulk in those games started and innings pitched, but their win percentage is lower. Their ERA is a little bit higher. They're both in the threes. The ERA plus is really where player on the left tends to win. They have a very high K percentage, a very low walk percentage. So the player on the left has been super efficient in a smaller sample size, and the player on the right has a little bit more bulk, but still has some of those numbers you like to see. I know you want 200 wins as a secondary qualifier, but 194 is pretty dang good, and he's over your strikeout measure of 2,500. Both players won championships. Player on the right was part of 5 championship teams, both over 5-time All-Stars. The player on the left was an 8-time All-Star, and the player on the right has a Cy Young in his trophy case. So let me know which one of those careers you're leaning towards as the better one and who you think they are.
Man, so if they are who I think they are, I actually think one's retired and one is not. Because one is finished and one is not, I think the one that is active will end up having the better numbers and the better career for what I would choose. But as it stands right now, if they're both retired and I'm wrong, I would be leaning towards the one with 62.3 WAR because he's got over the 2,500 strikeouts with 2,668. The other side, well, I'll just guess who I think they are, and then I'll explain myself.
Okay.
I think that the 62.3 WAR, I think that's David Cone. And he would be a miss for me, but he does meet one of the qualifiers. The player on the opposite side, ironically, is the other side of the rivalry, if I'm correct. I think that's Chris Sale. And I think that Chris Sale is one of my favorite candidates as a current player that is going to be like cookie cutter example for what it's going to take to be a Hall of Famer in the modern era. Am I right, Dom?
Jake, you are absolutely correct. That
Oh,
is David Cone and Chris Sale. And the reason I did this as well is because Chris Sale is about to add a Cy Young to his trophy case and is also possibly going to add a Triple Crown and still has a couple years left to, I think, become, at the end of the day, be at least comparable to David Cone, if not above David Cone. And David Cone is a very popular pick by a lot of people for one of the best pitchers overlooked by the Hall of Fame over the years. He had a really amazing career, was part of winning titles for both New York teams, and was just a really, really solid player throughout his entire career. A guy who is below my qualifier of a 3.5 ERA. I think if you have enough innings and your ERA is 3.5 or lower, that's impressive. And they're just really comparable guys. So Chris Sale, his rookie is the 2011 Topps. I have mine in a PSA 10.
Ooh,
I was big on Chris Sale when he first came up in the major leagues, and then he ended up playing for my Boston Red Sox and allowing us to win another World Series title. So I have a lot of fond memories of Chris Sale. I thought, based on how the way he ended his career in Boston, that he was going to be looked at as one of those, like, what could have been. He had the peak, but didn't take home any of the hardware, didn't put together the big stats. Now, with this big bounce back season for your Atlanta Braves, he's back in the Hall of Fame discussion. And that's what's been really interesting about Chris Sale is me and you have talked about this off air, but right now he sits at 2,414 strikeouts, and he's signed for the next 2 years in Atlanta. So he's going to, even if he doesn't stay healthy for the entire season like he did this year, he's going to have over 2,500 strikeouts, and let's just say somewhere near 150 wins at the bare minimum. How that affects his ERA, his K percentage, his walk percentage over time. Is he going to continue to be his efficient self? Is he going to accumulate WAR, another 9 or so, to be in the David Cone class there as well? 60 WAR is a big deal to me. It's going to be really interesting, but he is a guy that wasn't on my 40 active Hall of Famers the last couple of years that is going to be added when we do it next year. Spoiler for those of you that are going to watch that 3-hour episode next year. But the Chris Sale is just really awesome, and it couldn't be happening to a more competitive guy, a more likable dude. And I think that kind of stuff matters too with the writer. So I agree with you that he's putting himself in position to almost be the line for the modern day Hall of Famer in terms of his career output. A lot of Ks, maybe not the wins and innings that you would typically see from a Hall of Fame pitcher, but a good WAR, a good amount of strikeouts, efficient with the ERA, strikeouts and walks. Like that kind of stuff's going to matter. And the fact that he has the hardware, 8 All-Stars, about to have a Cy Young and maybe a Triple Crown, you start to get really interesting there.
It's funny, use Chris Sale first because I have a lot of thoughts and he applies to a lot of the things I want to get into, but I don't want us to spend 40 minutes right here on example 1. So I'll hold back some thoughts on WAR and on win totals for now. Let's go to number 2.
That's my producer hat, putting Chris Sale at the top of the show for that reason and then some. So comparison number 3 here. These players are a little bit lower on the WAR totem pole, but they're very comparable, 45.3 to 44.8. The player on the left has more bulk. He has started about 45 more games and pitched a lot more innings in those games, has double the amount of wins, a much lower ERA. But the player on the right, a little bit better in the rate stats in terms of strikeouts, almost double. K percentage is super high. Walks is lower in significantly less innings, but not by too much. And the player on the left is in the Hall of Fame currently with 2 ERA titles, and the player on the right has a championship, 4 All-Star appearances, 2 Cy Youngs, and an ERA title of himself.
I think I know the player on the right. I'm debating on the player on the left, but I'm going to take a stab at it. I think the player on the right with 44.8 WAR, and what gave it away for me was the 84 wins because I was just looking at this stuff. I'm pretty sure that's Jacob deGrom. And on the left, I'm taking a stab in the dark. It's a current Hall of Famer, someone who pitched a lot of innings, but a low K rate, like less than half a strikeout per inning. That makes me want to say like a dead ball guy, but I think it's a little bit newer than that. I'm going to just take a stab and say that it's Lefty Gomez. I don't know, but that's my guess.
So Lefty Gomez would have some Yankee championships.
Oh, yeah, duh.
But this is Hall of Famer this is Hall of Famer Addie Joss to go with Jacob deGrom. And the reason why it's Addie Joss is because Addie Joss didn't get the 10-year rule. And they made an exception to put him into the Hall of Fame because of how great he was in a short sample size. And there's a lot of pitchers with 2+ strikeouts, 2+ Cy Youngs outside of the Hall of Fame. But Jacob deGrom, if you just look at the pure rate stats, is, to me, the number 1 guy. There's the Brett Saberhagens of the world, the Tim Lincecums, the Corey Klubers. They all had great little peaks there. But Jacob deGrom, to me, just in terms of, I hate to use the eye test, but both the eye test and the run prevention statistics are insane. He's a high strikeout guy and someone that a lot of people were saying he could get to the Hall of Fame anyway. I know me and you are hoping he can put together another full season, kind of like Chris Sale just did, to get that 3rd Cy Young, to get him grouped out of those players and make his own little class. But to me, he's already like a step above those guys. And it's just interesting to compare him to someone that got the excuse from the Hall of Fame. His ERA is below 2. That is fantastic. A lot more innings as well to do that in. But it's just really interesting comparing a guy like Jacob deGrom to a guy who the Hall of Fame gave the pass to. I know the Cy Young Award wasn't a thing when Addie Joss was pitching. The championship that Jacob deGrom has is not really earned by him because he was out for that entire season and playoff run. But just a really interesting comparison here. And how do you feel about these really short career guys, but they put together the high end production?
So I'm more quantitative as opposed to qualitative, meaning that I prefer a longer career in this scenario as opposed to a really good peak one. I think of the current guys playing, DeGrom's the poster child for the peak Hall of Fame case. However, he's not done, so we don't know where the dust is going to settle. But if you're comparing him to someone who I think is outside the Hall looking in that's currently retired, who I think has a better case as a peak candidate, and he may be one of your blind comparisons, but Johan Santana, I believe, has a better peak resume than DeGrom. And he still hasn't gotten the call from Cooperstown. I don't particularly love this player's in, so this guy should be in, or this guy's out, so this guy should be out. But if we're drawing lines in the stand based on statistics, where I draw the line, Santana's above it and DeGrom's below it. So I think that how the Hall and the voters look at a peak candidate is also going to change. But I think that if a DeGrom gets in on the writer's ballot in the future, it does help the case of a Johan Santana through an era committee at the same time. So it's kind of one of those things where if certain guys get in, a rising tide raises all boats kind of deal. And I think that it could affect multiple guys, both active, upcoming on the ballot, on the writer's ballot, as well as guys that are retired and already in those era committee classifications.
No, I think that's fair. And I think that this is also another interesting thing because people are talking about how low is the bar going to drop for the modern day pitchers. And DeGrom, to me, is that poster child of, did he do enough for the writers to make an exception for how great he was, like they did for Addie Joss many, many decades ago. So that was comparison number 2. So you're 3 of 4 so far, Jake. I'm impressed.
I'm doing pretty good. There's a lot of pitchers out there, man.
Here is comparison number 3. Now, the player on the left is a better strikeout pitcher and has more WAR, but the player on the right would give more of the traditional statistics as well as the game started, the innings, the wins. Has very good strikeouts and a good walk rate as well. Both of these players were 4+ times All-Stars. Both these players won championships. Both these players performed in the playoffs, winning series MVP honors. So the player on the left has the more qualitative case, and the player on the right, I think for a lot of people, would have the quantitative edge. So where do you lean with guys like this?
Okay, so I guess I'm going to get into some of what I think about where the modern pitcher is going. So, Dom, you mentioned earlier in the show that where's the cutoff, for the era, because if you just change the threshold, let's just say for argument's sake, that the 200 wins is the new 300, okay? That's the new automatic. Well, where's the line? Because if you go all the way back to the dead ball era, well, guess what? We got a backlog of 50 guys that need to be in. If that was the
That's
the
a little
line.
more than that, yeah.
Yeah, it'd be a lot of guys. And I don't think anyone would think that that's the right way to go about it. So I workshopped this a little bit. I do think, and I'll tell you where I think the line is in just a second. I do think that the new line is 200 wins. I do think that is the new 300, that's an automatic based on a certain era that I'll get into in a second. Therefore, I also think 150 wins is a secondary qualifier in this same era. Okay. So if I was at 300, 200 before, now I think I'm 200, 150. Okay. Because I'm not ready to drop it. That's a big deal. Like Dom's about to fall out of his chair. That I would go anywhere in the realm of leaning towards more big haul in order to get more pitchers in. But I think that their opportunity, because of the way the game is played, drastically different in this era, affects them more than anyone else. I don't think that the changes to the way the game is played with hitting is near as drastic. I don't feel the need to make those changes, but for pitchers, I do. Especially being a quantitative guy, there are so few metrics to measure a pitcher by quantitatively. So my new thresholds for a pitcher, and now I'll tell you what I think the era is, Dom. If a pitcher's career started in the year 2000 to present, that's who kind of falls under this umbrella. So if your career, you were a rookie in 1999, you don't qualify for those new thresholds from me. And now you could have said, well, pitch counts and this and that and the other started, sooner than that. Well, 2000's an easy line to draw in the sand with the turn of the century there. So that's where I've drawn my line. Because of that, I've looked at both of these players, I believe, very recently. So I think that I'm going to be able to call out who they are. And if so, I'm on a freaking roll here with this game. But because of that, 200 wins there, which ironically, I didn't know this before I, started making my thresholds. This would be the only way this player would qualify for the Hall of Fame by my metrics, because he would still fall short of 2,500 Ks, but he hits that magic 200 win number on the dot. I think that's John Lester, your Red Sox boy, who won a couple championships there and also won in Chicago with the Cubs. On the flip side, by my prior metrics, I would have been aware of this player because he met the 2,500 K mark already as a secondary qualifier. But with this new metric that I'm talking about, he was a rookie after 2000, meaning that 150 win mark would be a secondary qualifier, making him a Hall of Famer in my book. And if Ray from Philly, Eddie watches this, and also Mike O, those three guys, if they're watching, they'll be happy to know that I would now vote for Cole Hamels, who I believe that is. Did I nail it?
Well, Jake, you are on a roll, my friend. So that's Cole Hamels and John Lester. And these are two really interesting guys because this is really my era that I grew up watching. I watched all of their career, and it makes me feel old as a pretty young man. But the fact is, both of these guys, at the height of their powers, were considered very, very top of the line starters. They were looked at as workhorses. They got the job done for their teams. And it's just funny that you look at their statistics at the end of the career compared to even the Addy Josses of the world from not that long ago. And you're like, wow, like it's not really that impressive. And to me, Cole Hamels, I know that 2,500 means a lot to you. To me, the difference between the 2566, 2560, and 2488, it's not massive. I do know that he did it in less innings. He was more efficient. The Cole Hamels train, and I'm not trying to make enemies in Philly. I know how the water is down there, but Cole Hamels' case seems extremely similar to Chase Utley's case for me, and I don't want to get into the whole Chase Utley thing again. But a player who qualitatively has a very impressive WAR total, has some very nice statistics here and there, but the whole resume as a whole is just really questionable to me. So I'd actually have Cole Hamels and John Lester below my line. I'm not dropping it quite as much as you, but I think they're both guys that, because of the careers they had, and like you said, in the era they had it, are going to stick around on the writer's ballot and be interesting conversations for years to come.
And I will say that even though, wow, look at me being big haul and Dom being small haul on this discussion here, but I will say that these guys are like at the like line where the thresholds are for my guys and why, where I draw the line. With Leicester, literally one less win and I'm a no. I mean, that's crazy. But
12 more strikeouts though.
12 more strikeouts and it'd be a secondary, but he's only got one at 200 automatic, right? Under this, new metric that I'm going by for myself. Hamels, you take a look at him. Okay, he's got the secondary qualifier. 61 less strikeouts. The wheels fall off just a little bit sooner, and he's below. He's got 163 wins, 13 above 150. That's a little more comfortable, but it's not like they're far and above like defining eras, pitchers way above these new thresholds. So in terms of guys that I'm kind of now warming up to, and now I'm saying yes, where I would have said no, even as recent as 2 weeks ago, which is a big deal for me if you watch this show. That's saying something. They're right at that line. So it'll be interesting to see how the voters themselves handle players like this. Because there are a lot of voters out there that believe no era should be void of the representatives of the best from any given decade. And if that's the case, Hamels and Lester, from that perspective, would also be in that conversation as some of the best pitchers within their era.
Yeah, and I mean they wouldn't be in the top 5 class. The top 5 class is still the guys that are kicking right now. Right. The Verlanders, the Scherzers, the Kershaws, Greinke's still active, I guess. It's such a shame he hasn't pitched this year. But and Sabathia, who's going to be on the ballot next year, like that's like the 5. And then there's a few other guys that you can mix in there, the Doc Hollidays and different things. But, right. But they're probably in the top 10-ish. They're top 10 borderline of their era, which is an interesting conversation within itself. But it'll be interesting. Kind of like just hitting your milestone there. Cole Hamels just misses the number of 60 WAR that makes me kind of elevate them a little bit analytically. The fact that he was so efficient and good analytically, but then still didn't hit that. I know it's only one win, but it's just wild to me. And it was a shame that he didn't get to come back the way he wanted to. I know he was trying to for a few years there. And he got his number retired in Philadelphia. Lester can get a free beer in both Boston and Chicago. That's a pretty good life to have, but it'll be interesting to see how the Hall of Fame voters treat these guys because there are pitchers that they've let be one and done on the ballot that have better cumulative statistics than these guys.
And not that they're direct comps for like a Jack Morris, but a lot of people's argument for Jack Morris, if you were for him, was his postseason resume. And both of those guys also have that going for them. I mean, Lester broke 2 curses.
Most wins in the 1980s too. Jack Morris had the most wins in the 1980s too, when that was still a big stat. But so this comparison right here, it's separated by exactly 1 win above replacement. Player on the left, I kind of try to stagger these things this way. Player on the left accumulated more, had more games started, more innings pitched, more wins, not by a huge margin, but still got there. And the player on the right had a lower ERA, had a higher ERA plus, had slightly more strikeouts and less innings, had a better K rate and a lower walk rate. And the player on the right is in the Hall of Fame because he's got 3 championships, a Cy Young, and 9 All-Star appearances. But the player on the left has 3 All-Star appearances, but 2 ERA titles, and is outside the Hall of Fame. You're 5 for 6, Jake. Do you know these 2 players?
I think you may have stumped me here, Dom. Nothing's jumping out at me. 209 wins, All-Stars, the championships, Cy Young, 2480s. I'm just going to throw out for the 67.1 WAR with the 2486 strikeouts and 209 wins. I'm just going to guess that that's Whitey Ford, even though I feel like he won more championships than that. I could be wrong. For the 66.1 WAR with 229 wins, but outside the Hall, man, that's tough. I'm going to say it's Louis Tiant. Yeah, we're going to go with Louis Tiant.
So your guess is Louis Tiant and Whitey Ford.
Yeah.
All right. So this comparison has actually been made a lot, and you did get half of it correct. The player on the left is Louis Tiant, but the player on the right is Don Drysdale.
Interesting.
Now, this is something that gets brought up in Hall of Fame circles quite a bit, that some people say Don Drysdale didn't have enough of a Hall of Fame career and is below the line of what should have been allowed. And some people say Louis Tiant is above the Hall of Fame line and should be in the same class of Hall of Fame pitchers as Don Drysdale. So they get compared quite a bit. I went to the 2022 Baseball Hall of Fame induction, and Tony Oliva, who's a friend and former teammate of Louis Tiant, made sure in his speech that he made time to say that Louis Tiant needs to be inducted into the Hall of Fame. Like, while he's living, he is deserving. And when you compare him to a guy like Don Drysdale, who he's a Hall of Famer to me. I don't know if he hits your pre-2000 things because he's just below 2,500 strikeouts. But both great pitchers from really tough eras. They were workhorses. They had great seasons. They both were well above the league average when there was a lot of great pitchers in the 60s and 70s and 50s for Drysdale. So really interesting guys here, that when you're talking about all these modern guys and what the line gets moved for them, how much more impressive does Louis Tiant's 2 ERA titles and 229 wins with the bulk that he had compared to those modern guys look compared to guys like Lester and Hamels, which were below 2,800 innings?
So I'm going to speak mostly to Louis Tiant. I'm not going to get into should Don Drysdale be in or not. I just don't want to go down that rabbit hole with any of these players today. But for Tiant, I'm actually a yes, Dom. It probably warms your little Red Sox heart. But the reason being is, the pre-2000 metric would be as a secondary qualifier of 200 plus wins, and he has 2+ ERA titles. So I would be a yes. But I am going to get into something about WAR here, or at least part of a thought here. It's not really my thing, but I did look it up because I was curious. Do you know what the average WAR is for a Hall of Fame pitcher?
I'm pretty sure it's in the 60s.
It is 66, and Tiant is at 66.1.
Yeah.
Okay. So
because there's some really high-end pitchers WAR-wise.
Yes. So there's an argument to be made there. If you're one of the people, or if you are a voter that said, well, what's the average Hall of Fame pitcher look like? And WAR was something you looked at. Well, Tiant checks that box. And in a lot of ways, he is the Latin version of Minoso. He was the first really big Latin pitcher that was kind of a godfather in a way to a lot of the pitchers that came up from Latin America after him. They call him El Tiante for a reason. So he's admired and respected a lot within that culture. And that is something that could give him a bump, like a Minoso, that puts him over the hump to get in the Hall.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm a yes on Tiant as well. And this is before we even decide what the bar should be with the modern guys. I think Louis Tiant should be in the Hall of Fame. And we talked about this on our classic era ballot. You actually mentioned Jim McCormick and Tommy Bond as two guys who you think has the resumes, even for their era, to be meriting election. There's also Bobby Matthews and Tony Mullane, who are in that same kind of category from that era of the dead ball, that have well over 200 wins, have ERAs below 4, have a decent amount of strikeouts. But Louis Tiant, to me, if you're sitting in the new era committee, which is just the beginning of baseball till 1980, there's going to be more people in that room that want Louis Tiant in the Hall of Fame and push for him. He's still living. he had a big impact. He made a lot of friends. He was a great baseball lifer. He was even coaching college baseball at an art institute, as Sammy Thunder also told us. So he was in it for his life. And I think that Louis Tiant has a lot more momentum, especially with Tony Oliva shouting him out 2 years ago. Kurt Schilling saying, if I'm outside the Hall of Fame with Louis Tiant, I'm okay with that. It's a name that gets brought up a lot for pitchers outside the Hall of Fame. And I think when you compare him to the guys we just looked at, Lester Hamels, it's clear to me why Louis Tiant should be in the Hall of Fame when we're having questions about some of the other guys.
He feels like one of those guys that all it's going to take is the right era committee. You know, if an Oliva ends up in the room, you know, if one of the other Hall of Famers that has spoken out for him end up in the room at the same time, you know, then it only takes a couple more swing votes, and you know,
Former
we could
teammate.
be looking at former teammate. We could be looking at a future Hall of Famer in Louis Tiant. I really think so.
Yeah, and the fun thing about him is I don't have his rookie for my 1965 top set yet, but if he gets elected, he will be the only rookie in the 1965 Hall of Fame rookie in the 1965 top set that is a solo player card. The rest of them are all multiplayer rookies. So that could also make him and that card stand out quite a bit on the hobby end of things. So just something to keep in mind. If you don't have a Louis Tiant rookie, maybe pick it up before the next classic era ballot. So this comparison here, very close in WAR again, less than 2 WAR difference. Player on the left pitched in a little bit more games, but less as a starter than the player on the right. The player on the right has more innings pitched, more wins, a slightly lower ERA, a slightly higher ERA plus, but the big difference is the strikeouts. The player on the left has significantly more strikeouts, higher K percentage, both 5-time All-Stars. The player on the right walked a few less batters and was a better fielder, won a championship. So, Jake, you're on a pretty good roll here. You've missed 2 so far. What do you think of this one?
This is a tough one, man. I may be completely off on this. Neither are Hall of Famers. They're both outside the Hall. We've got 200 wins plus for both. We've got one that meets the metric of 2,500 Ks, but the other one doesn't. I think I'm going to get these wrong. The 200 win even, I think he had actually more than this. He could have 214 wins, but I don't think he had a championship. So for the left-hand side, I'm going to say it's but he definitely had gold gloves. I'm kicking around Jake Peavy. But I don't think either one of these is him. Dude.
Jake Peavy was a 2013 World Series champion with my Boston Red Sox.
Oh, he was. Well, then we're going to say the guy with the gold gloves is Jake Peavy. The 200 wins, that had David Price vibes to me, but I think he was lower than that on strikeouts and on wins. It's not Tommy John. He had a lot more wins than that. He had like 288. But I need to throw out a name. I don't need to take up 5 minutes trying to figure out who it is.
This is going to be like the one that I think I get the most comments about because I did not pick like high-end exciting names.
Well, even though it's a more exciting name, I'm just, for argument's sake, I'm just going to say the one on the left is Dwight Gooden, even though I don't think it's him, and Jake Peavy on the right.
All right, so this is your first offer.
I knew it had to happen.
It's Chuck Finley, Mark Burley.
Oh, I should have got Burley.
The reason I included Mark Burley is because he's been hanging around on the writer's ballot, and he did debut before 2000. But it's just interesting that like his career is getting the appreciation that it's getting on the writer's ballot. There's people that are voting for him and trying to keep him around and saying for his era, like the way he was able to stay in the game, the efficiency, the defense, like all those different things. He had one of the most iconic perfect games that I've gotten to witness. That was a very exciting one with some big plays in it. But Mark Buehrle gets this Hall of Fame love and consideration. Some Hall of Fame prospectors have bought up Buehrle autographs and rookies. But is his career that much better than Chuck Finley's? A guy who did not get a lot of support from the writers. And, I know they pitched in slightly different eras, but it was still more modern day approach by the hitters. It's just interesting to me that these two lefties were so similar when I was looking up WAR and different things of that nature, because Buehrle, I think, is becoming a product of the shift we're seeing in how the voters are viewing pitchers, as opposed to like what his career actually is.
Buehrle is actually the line for your debut on the rule for 2000. His rookie year his first appearance was 2000. So he's the
first ballot Hall of Famer automatic for you.
Yeah. Like 2 weeks ago,
1,800 strikeouts. That's automatic for you.
I'm a no on Buehrle, and now I'm a yes. Which this is a great example. Like people say all the time, well, if you were a Hall of Fame voter and you had a ballot, if he's not a Hall of Famer year 1, how is he a Hall of Famer year 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever? This is how. Okay, I'm not claiming to be as well researched or well versed in being worthy of a Hall of Fame vote as some of the guys that do. Maybe I am with some of the votes you see out there. Besides the point. Point being, I have changed my opinion on Mark Buehrle, and this is something that I look at a lot. Yeah, it's for fun, but I take this very seriously. Dom and I wouldn't spend this much time doing a podcast if we didn't love the Hall of Fame and we didn't love researching it. And Buehrle's the prime example for me that I was a no, and now I'm a yes. So I would be one of those, plus votes, as he's hung around on the ballot. So he's an interesting one from that perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I thought he debuted before 2000 for sure.
2000.
But yeah, I was comparing them as just two lefties that are a little bit on the older end of the spectrum for the time periods that had really, really comparable careers, down to the WAR and ERA and different things that are separated by not very much. But, Chuck Finley, heck of a lot more strikeouts. So that was interesting to me, and it put Chuck Finley on my radar for kind of just the future of the Hall of Fame pitcher. Like maybe he could get some consideration down the road once Clemens and Schilling stop blocking the ballot.
He's down the line, but he does have 200 wins and 2,500 plus Ks. I had him on my spreadsheet.
Mm-hmm. Couldn't pick him out of the lineup, though. So this next one, again, separated by less than 2 wins. Player on the right has more bulk. Player on the left was more efficient, had a better win percentage, higher ERA plus, lower ERA, higher K percentage, lower walk percentage. Player on the right has a chance, but the player on the left has more hardware, 6 All-Stars, Cy Young, 2 ERA titles. Player on the right has a World Series MVP. So where do you lean with this? Do you lean towards the bulk, or do you lean towards the efficiency?
Well, if the one on the left is who I'm 99% sure it is, and King Felix, I'm a yes on both, because if that is King Felix, 150 plus wins, and he's got the 2,500 plus strikeouts, plus he's got the 2 ERA titles, 3 secondary qualifiers there with only a need of 2 by my metrics. The pitcher on the right, not depending on era, 200 plus wins and 2,500 plus Ks, I would be a yes on this player as well. I think the one on the right is another random one in the lane of Chuck Finley, and I'm going to guess that that's Frank Tanana. I'm going Felix Hernandez and Frank Tanana, even though I don't know if Frank Tanana won a championship or a World Series MVP.
You are back on the board because the player on the left is Felix Hernandez, but the player on the right is Mickey Lolich. Now, Mickey Lolich for the longest time, had the most strikeouts by a left-handed pitcher outside of the Hall of Fame. So he's someone that gets brought up in a lot of things when you're saying, oh, this player deserves more Hall of Fame consideration. He was less than 200 Ks away from 3,000 and had over 200 wins. WAR isn't quite where I'd like it to be, but interesting case, and it landed right around where King Felix does. And he doesn't have the bulk that Mickey Lolich has, but efficiency-wise, he truly was the king. And he had a really, really solid career. I was a big Felix Hernandez fan, so I have his Topps rookie, BGS 9.5. Really great player, another iconic perfect game that I witnessed, and someone that's going to be debuting on the ballot this winter. So Felix Hernandez, big name there. That's a good sweet auto. He's going to be debuting on the ballot, and I think because of the era he pitches in, much like Mark Burley versus Chuck Finley, he's going to hang around and be talked about when Mickey Lolich did not do super well with the writer ballot. He got a little bit of support, but he did not climb towards that 50% threshold that kind of makes you eventually get elected. So I thought this was an interesting comparison between eras here.
Here's a cracking Cooperstown prediction. I think King Felix is the first quote-unquote peak modern pitcher to get in the Hall that will help redefine what is a Hall of Fame pitcher in this era. I really think he'll be the first one.
As a Felix fan, I would love for him to get into the Hall of Fame. With the way I look at Hall of Fame pitchers, I can't be a hypocrite here. He's below my line. He had a fantastic career. I think pitching in Seattle both helped and hurt him. It helped him because that was a massive pitcher's park, that it wasn't as easy to hit home runs off him. It hurt him because Seattle's a small market team that did not assemble really good offenses and teams around him. But unlike Jacob deGrom, who we talked about earlier, King Felix does have some bulk. His inning total is closer to the Lester Hamels range than it is anywhere near the deGrom, Lincecum types that have the Cy Young stuff. So it'll be interesting to see if he gets supported this year.
He currently has double the wins Jacob deGrom has. Double. And I mean, it's weird, this role reversal here where, I'm wanting more in and you're wanting less in. But my boy Sammy is yelling at the screen right now. Give some pitchers some love, Dom. Okay? Get them in the Hall.
Hey. I'm more than okay with pitchers getting in the Hall. To me, though, because of this podcast venture, I have thought about it deeper and talked about like what a Hall of Famer is to me. And I have to stick to those guns. I can't just chop my milestones down by 100 wins. I can't be doing that. But I love this part of the discussion because some of these voters are going to be like you and make some extreme pivots in what they're looking for and look for specific things. Like ERA plus, I think I've touched on it on every comparison, but I think that's going to be a big one because that is park adjusted and that's for the league average. So it'll show you how much better that player was than the pitcher of his era. And the players that are 10, 15, 20 to 50% better with those borderline 150 to 200 wins, 2,000 to 2,500 strikeouts, those are the guys that I think are going to be interesting conversations moving forward, even if I wouldn't elect them all. Now, I think this is a good time in the show to follow our name. Go ahead and crack something, cracking Cooperstown, as we're almost an hour in here.
This is going to be a long one, but this is one that needed this kind of length and in-depth discussion. But we are going to stick to the cracking Cooperstown name, and some people are really going to cringe with what we're cracking today. I know if Jason, Mr. Fisherbike, is listening, this is one of his favorite cards. We're going to be cracking 1953 Topps, formerly SGC 1.5 Satchel Paige. So let the people know a little bit about Satchel Paige, Dom, while I crack some plastic.
Oh, it's beautiful. Satchel Paige is one of the greatest pitchers that ever lived. Many of you know that iconic Topps card is his only Topps card from his major league career because of baseball's unfortunate segregation during his peak of his powers. But Satchel Paige, with the Negro League stats becoming official major league stats, has moved way up the major league statistic board in terms of bringing in his old stats. He became someone that was more resume to being a Hall of Famer with legend and a resume. And my favorite Satchel Paige story is that later on in his career, when he was basically a coach at this point, at 58 years old in 1965, he pitched for the Kansas City Athletics in a major league game. And he went 3 innings, scoreless baseball. What a guy. He had, we're talking about these pitchers now that because of the way that they're handled and getting hurt, they can't accumulate these long careers and throw on the big league mound. And Satchel Paige was throwing on a big league mound at 58 years old against legit hitters. Truly one of the all-time greats, a guy that just has an iconic smile. So many magical stories in the career of Satchel Paige, and that card, to a lot of people, is the first thing they think of when they hear the name Satchel Paige in our hobby. A really great one right there. It's
and
free.
He is free and will go to his permanent home in the binder where he belongs, you graded card people.
I couldn't do that one personally just because of card value, but I respect that's how you want to collect them, man.
All right, so back to our blind resumes, man. I think I needed that break there, literally and figuratively. Went a little cold here in the middle. Let's see if I can finish strong.
Yeah, you were just on the whole time. You were leaning down. You weren't cracking the slab. You were just checking Baseball Reference to figure out who these guys are. So this next one, a little bit more of a WAR gap. There's about 11 WAR difference here. The player on the left was less valuable in more games, but wasn't a starter for as many of them. The player on the right has more innings pitched and a higher win total with a slightly better win percentage, with a lower ERA and a higher ERA plus. But the player on the left has more strikeouts and a lower walk rate. Player on the left is in the Hall of Fame, won a championship, 3 All-Stars, and 16 whopping Gold Gloves. But the player on the right, 4-time All-Star, outside the Hall of Fame.
I'm going to nail this one, Dom. I'm not going to waste any time. I said like 5 minutes
ago. This is the one
I'm
expecting you to nail. Yes.
I said a few minutes ago that I believe Tommy John has 288 wins, so we're going to go with Tommy John there. And on the left, I was thinking through it, looking down the list of statistics, and then 16 Gold Gloves. I believe that's Mr. Jim Cott.
Yes, it is, sir. You're back on the board. All you need to do is crack a slab to get something right. Jim Cott, I have no problem with him being in the Hall of Fame. Let's just make that very clear. The 280 wins with the 2,000 strikeouts, like that to me with the 16 Gold Gloves and baseball lifer. He was also an announcer for many years, and that gets included into his baseball resume. I think he was a fine Hall of Famer. He gave a great Hall of Fame speech, but as soon as he was elected, because he was not at the top of my list on that committee, I said, Tommy John is now a Hall of Famer. That was the first thing I said. And it's because of this. He doesn't have the hardware, but if you tell a random baseball fan at the stadium, do you know who Jim Cott is? Do you know who Tommy John is? Tommy John's name, because of that historic elbow procedure, is one of the most well-known names in baseball. If you ask a non-baseball fan about Tommy John, they might know what it is and who it is. So that, to me, his career was more than deserving of it. He reaches my 60 WAR threshold. He's 12 wins away from 300. He had over 2,000 Ks. Tommy John's a Hall of Famer, and you can get his 1964 Topps rookie card in mid-grades for nothing because pitchers are not as collected. Jim Cott was the same way. Before he got elected to the Hall of Fame, you could get his rookie cards for nothing.
Yeah. So I'm actually a no on Tommy John. However, I would not be upset at all if he got in based on the metrics that I have. But this is why, like, I could be swayed to vote for him outside of my metrics. And that is, I don't know if I've ever said that. He's over 200 wins, secondary qualifier. Okay. He was just 12 short of 300. We would not be having the same conversation if Tommy John didn't have Tommy John. Okay. He would have had 300 wins and he'd be an all-time great. He would have been automatic. Okay. He does have the fame thing going for him. His name is synonymous with the game of baseball, always will be. But here's where I'm going to go back to WAR for just a second. Okay. So on average, a Hall of Fame pitcher has 66 WAR, right? Here's the list of pitchers that are currently outside of the Hall that have 66 or more. Roger Clemens, Justin Verlander, Kurt Schilling, Clayton Kershaw, my boy Jim McCormick, Max Scherzer, Zach Greinke, Kevin Brown, and Rick Russell. Okay. Now, if you lowered that threshold to 60, okay, that's not a huge jump. That's just 6 WAR down to 60. Nice round number. Here are the additional names that are outside the Hall as pitchers that have 60 or more WAR. Louis Tiant, Bobby Matthews, who we've mentioned already. Fun fact about him, if that dude gets three more wins, 300-game winner, we wouldn't be talking about him right now. You've got Tommy John, CC Sabathia, David Cone, Tommy Bond, Tony Mullane, Charlie Buffington, Andy Pettit, and the aforementioned Mark Burley. So if you are someone who takes the qualitative component and you are a fan of WAR and sabermetrics into consideration, 60 is not an irrational number. Not as an automatic, but it's kind of part of your resume. That would put Tommy John over the bump. And another revelation here, Dom, for pitchers, I'm considering taking WAR more seriously in my personal evaluation because of their lack of quantitative numbers that you can measure them by. And I think that's common for most Hall of Fame voters now and will be going forward. As those bars either have to be lowered or you got to look elsewhere to how to measure a Hall of Fame pitcher.
Mm-hmm. And because they didn't play every day, they didn't have as many opportunities to accumulate WAR. So that's why some of these comparisons, I dropped the ball to the mid-40s because even though the average Hall of Famer is 66, it's being lifted up by the Walter Johnsons of the world. To me, if I'm looking at 60 for position players, I should be able to drop that bar 10 to 15 wins for someone who played significantly less games as a pitcher. So that's why, to me, 60 is the number I look for across the board. But with pitchers, I'm also a little bit more lenient there to considering them. Now, they still need to have the strikeouts and the wins in a range where I'm comfortable with it. Some of those guys you named have well under 2,000 strikeouts or have under 200 wins. So that's a very interesting thing. But Tommy John, to me, the 12 wins away from 300, the synonymous name, you look at his career next to Jim Cox and you're just like, Gold Gloves is the big difference. And while those are great, and he has the second most Gold Gloves ever, to me, it isn't a 5 to 10 year gap between when they should be elected. I think Tommy John should be the first pitcher put at the top of that next thing, if not Louis Tiant. I think those are kind of the two big names from that classic era that are going to get, one of them is going to be on the ballot and should get significant support.
And that threshold of 60 WAR for a pitcher is still fairly high for a pitcher. Burley has exactly 60. Mm-hmm. He is 66th all time in pitching WAR. So that's even well within the top 100. It's within the top 70. We're talking a handful of names here. We're not talking, 3 dozen. So I think that is of note.
Mm-hmm. Now, we're shifting here on the show because this is the future of the Hall of Fame pitcher. And there's also some guys that pitch out of the bullpen. They don't start every fourth or fifth day. These are relievers. And I think that as the future of the Hall of Fame starting pitcher has changed through the writers, we have also started to see the change in what is a Hall of Fame reliever, because that is the least represented position in the Hall of Fame, is relief pitching. And Mariano Rivera and Trevor Hoffman, they were obvious first ballot guys, like the all-time save leader, all those great things. The awards for best reliever are named after them, synonymous. But there's some other guys that now it's just like, how far is the bar? Because you can't hold them to the Rivera and Hoffman standard for saves. What is the real bar now? We talk about 500 saves as an automatic for us, but before Hoffman and Mariano came around, there was no 500 club. So what is a Hall of Fame reliever, I think, is an interesting way to close out this episode, pun intended. So, Jake, looking at these potential Hall of Fame relievers, they're very close in WAR. It's a little over 2 WAR difference. The player on the right pitched in more games, but the player on the left was more efficient across the board. They both have 1 championship. They both have 2 reliever of the year awards, and the player on the right went to 2 more All-Star games than the player on the left.
I think I know the player on the left. I'm pretty sure that is Kenley Jansen, because I look at his and Craig Kimbrell's numbers often. The one on the right, I think, is one of 2 relievers, and I can't decide if I think that it's K-Rod or Billy Wagner, but I can't place championships in my head for either one of them. I'm going to say it's K-Rod, and that was that Angels random World Series. So let's go with Kenley and K-Rod.
You're closing out things strong here, bud. That was K-Rod, 2002 Angels. He won the World Series with them. And yeah, I mean, K-Rod is currently on the Hall of Fame ballot. He's getting marginal support. I think that once Wagner is off the ballot, a lot of the people that are voting for Wagner will add K-Rod to their ballot. Not everyone, but a good chunk of them. And it's just interesting because me and you kind of talk about like, oh, if with Wagner trending towards the Hall of Fame, Jansen is already there. Like, he's going to pass him in saves. He has the same amount or more strikeouts, like all these different things. But just comparing him to the only other reliever that's been able to get the attention of the baseball writers recently, that's had a heck of his career in his own right, Francisco Rodriguez, I think that it's an interesting comparison between these two. And it's how K-Rod does once Wagner is off the ballot, I think will be very telling for if the writer base is pro pushing these high-end relievers that accumulated 400 plus saves, or if they're going to be toggling it back and be more case by case.
I do think Wagner's going to get in. He was so close. I think he's going to get over the top. I personally wouldn't vote for. Yeah, I personally wouldn't vote for Wagner, but I think he's going to be a Hall of Famer. I also personally think K-Rod just misses. I wouldn't vote for him. I think I will end up voting for Kenley in the long run if I had a vote, because I think he's going to get to 500 saves. And I think that's the magic number for a reliever. I just think he's going to get there. We'll see. He's also rising up the ranks of relief pitcher strikeouts, which is not something that's talked about often, but should matter for their ranks. I don't know if I've ever heard it mentioned outside of me and Dom talking, or maybe like me with a Chris Hall of Fame pullers. Like, no one talks about it. But he's rising up.
I've brought it up quite a few times. There's only 14 relief pitchers in the history of baseball with 1,000 career strikeouts. And I don't think that gets talked about nearly enough. We're talking about the 3,000 strikeout club being smaller than the 300 win club. The 1,000 strikeout reliever club is even smaller. And it's because there's less of those guys pitching. They don't get the same bulk as the starting pitchers, and the starting pitchers are only pitching once every 4th, 5th day. So to get 1,000 plus strikeouts, it's noticeable, you know.
You got to have a really high strikeout rate for a really long time. and hold on to one of the most volatile jobs in sports.
And we got one more here. Player on the left has a higher WAR by over 5, with over almost 100 more innings pitched. Player on the right, though, better win record, more saves. Player on the left has a lower ERA and higher ERA plus, a 187 ERA plus, to the 158, just a measly 158 on the right. Player on the right has more strikeouts than player on the left with a higher K percentage, but the player on the left has a lower walk percentage, and in 100 more innings has walked less batters. One championship on the right, both 7+ time All-Stars. Player on the left has 1 Rolaids Relief Award win, and the player on the right has 3 of those bad boys.
As good as I have done today, people are going to think that you told me who they were going to be, but I have no idea. I think that the 440 saves is my boy, Craig Kimbrell, and we're going to talk about what's going to happen with him in just a moment. And I believe the other one is the aforementioned Billy Wagner.
So you've closed out things beautifully here. You've done a lot better than I expected. I did not give him the answers. Billy Wagner, he does have more WAR, was analytically just incredibly impressive. The ERA plus, the low walk rate. Neither one of these players had massive postseason success in their career, but both guys that during the peak of their powers were very, very dominant relievers. And I have kind of changed my tune a little bit too. I think more so than I have on starting pitchers. With Billy Wagner getting the support that he's gotten, that has made me push guys like K-Rod, like Kimbrell, like Jansen up a few notches from where they were borderline to me as like maybe one of them will get support to like I think they're going to get significant consideration for election. Craig Kimbrell obviously closing out the show here because he was recently DFA'd by the Baltimore Orioles. Very sad. Fall from grace. And I have to say, as a Red Sox fan, Kenley Jansen has not had a great second half either. Neither one of these guys have done very well since the Midsummer Classic. But to me, what they've both accomplished at this point is enough to get consideration. If one of them is able to bounce back and stretch out long enough to get 500 saves, then I think it goes back to our conversation of that's automatic and we don't have to talk about it. But I think with Wagner's support, even though Kimbrell and Kenley don't quite have his efficiency, they have the bulk and the statistics that you're going to be looking for. They're both past him in strikeouts, and I think it's going to be a really interesting conversation for years to come with these guys hitting the ballot. I talked about Aroldis Chapman as well being one of those 14 relievers with over 1,000 strikeouts, but his saves and ERA isn't quite on the same level as these guys. But I think the 4 guys that I just showed you are the big 4 relievers outside the Hall of Fame right now that are going to get really looked at by this writer's base. As they lower the bar for the starting pitchers, there should be some slight lowering of the bar for relievers because they've been very strict with who they elect on the relief pitching side.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I'm sad about Kimbrell being DFA'd and the wheels have fell off because going into this year, Dom and I talked about it, and I'm like, if it ended today and we're going to bet on it today, what's going to happen? Kimbrell had the slide edge on Kenley, and it just looked like the wheels have fallen off a little bit faster. I hope that he gets a chance with a middling team like a Detroit or a Blue Jays. Dom and I were talking offline of like where they're not a true contender, where he won't get save opportunities, but they're not a bottom dweller either, where he won't get save opportunities. I'm hoping he can get one more shot and build up those numbers a little bit. And if I'm not mistaken, is he now the relief pitcher strikeout king? I don't want to put you on the spot, but I know he was very close.
I didn't actually recheck the list. But I do think he is up there.
Yeah, I know he's getting close to it if he didn't surpass it. But they will be him, Kenley, K-Rod will be interesting cases once we both inevitably think Billy Wagner does get in. Now, as we kind of wrap things up, Dom, and as we close out here, I do want to show a couple cards because we both collect, and it's about cracking Cooperstown, both who's going to get in and how can you collect them. So there are a couple other cards I had, guys, that you should grab. Like I've got the Mark Burley. We actually talked about him a fair bit for various reasons today, whether it's that 200 win threshold, or he cracks that 60 WAR threshold, and he's hanging around on the ballot. Maybe he should be considered more than people initially thought, like myself. Or I've got the Johan Santana rookie card here, Fleer Tradition, where I think he is the peak candidate in the modern era that's not currently on the ballot that should be in my opinion. Of course, we've got greats like Verlander, which it might be a great time to buy Verlander. Slam dunk Hall of Famer, but having a down year. He's not getting talked about as much, especially with the Astros being out of contention. Another guy, same thing, because he's hurt right now. Again, Kershaw, man, one of the greatest players, maybe the greatest pitcher I've ever seen pitch, arguably Clayton Kershaw, his autograph. Or a 3,000 club strikeout member that's in the window that Dom and I talk about all the time before he hits the ballot, CC Sabathia, his rookie. Or Max Scherzer, who, ironically right now, him and Verlander are tied in strikeouts as of this recording, 3,407, both members of the 3,000 Strikeout Club. And we mentioned this guy. It's a shame that he didn't pitch this year. He's so close to the 3,000 Strikeout Club, but he may be done. Cracking Cooperstown exclusive here. I won't even show this on my channel otherwise for a while. My Zach Greinke autograph I just got in this week. Rookie autograph, actually. Good time to buy a Greinke autograph, too.
Yeah, and what's great about all those guys you just showed is they're going to get into the Hall of Fame unquestioned. And because they're pitchers, because they're not at the top of their game right now, you can go and buy them up for prices now. And in the next year for Sabathia, in the coming years for those other guys, you're going to be like, oh my God, look at what these things are selling for now that they actually have the HOF next to their name, even though they're already Hall of Famers. That's why I didn't even bring them up during these blind comparisons, because to me and you, 3,000 Ks is in.
Right.
So those guys weren't really a discussion, especially them all having well over 200 wins as well. Kind of adds to that with the higher wars and somewhat. But this was really fun. I hope everyone out there enjoyed this little over an hour of Baseball Hall of Fame talk. Let us know in the comments below which pitcher you believe in as a Hall of Fame candidate that we didn't discuss in this video, or which one you agree with us the most about. And how are you viewing Hall of Fame pitchers moving forward? Are you dropping your qualifiers as low as Jake is? Are you taking it more on a case-by-case basis like myself? Or are you somewhere in between? Let us know in the comments. We appreciate all the engagement and the feedback. You can reach out to both of us on Instagram, Saving Sports Cards and Legends Never Die Collection, respectively. And reach out to us with any questions, suggestions for the show, or just to talk cards, Hall of Fame, in baseball. We love all the conversations, and we kind of let time go away when we have these sit-down episodes. It was great to be back, brother.
Yeah, man, great to be back. And two, in case anybody's still listening, where do you want us to go next around the diamond? I know Dom and I are enjoying these episodes. I'm sure that's going to be under consideration for what we do next. So if there's something you'd like to see, which position next, that'd be great. But other than that, it's been a lot of fun. I look forward to the next one. But for all of you listening, keep collecting, and God bless.